Welcome back to Real Life Documentary, a channel that is dedicated to giving you insights on real-life stories and happenings. Please support us by subscribing to our channel. On a scorching July afternoon in 2019, the quiet peace of a suburban neighborhood was shattered, leaving a lasting impact on the community. At the heart of this tragedy were the Hendersons. Thaddius, a 45-year-old investment banker known for his dedication to both work and community, and his wife Margot, a 43-year-old part-time yoga instructor with a lively personality and contagious laughter. For over a decade, they had been a prominent, admired couple, their marriage seen as ideal by many. Living next door were the Coopers, Elaine, a widow, and her 19-year-old son Liam, a college student home for the summer. Although the Coopers tended to keep to themselves more than the Hendersons, they were generally liked by their neighbors. No one could have foreseen the disastrous event that would bring their lives together in such a tragic way. Thaddius Henderson, raised by working-class parents in rural Iowa, had always been ambitious. Through hard work and determination, he climbed the social ladder, becoming a standout in his company by his early 30s. His sharp mind and direct approach made him popular with both colleagues and clients. Margot, originally Margot Sinclair, had a very different path. Raised by a college professor and an artist, she grew up in an environment that encouraged creativity and self-expression. She pursued modern dance in college with hopes of a career in performance, but a knee injury in her senior year forced her to shift focus. This led her into the world of yoga and wellness coaching, where she eventually found a new passion. Thaddius and Margot first met at a charity gala in 2003. Thaddius, already professionally successful but lacking in social skills, was immediately captivated by Margot's vibrant energy and charm. To Margot, Thaddius represented stability and the chance to live comfortably, allowing her to pursue her passions without financial concerns. They married a year later in an extravagant ceremony that was the highlight of their social circle. In the early years of their marriage, they were genuinely happy. Thaddius's career continued to thrive, and he took pride in providing Margot with a life of comfort. Margot, in turn, embraced her role as the ideal corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and attending social events that were key to Thaddius's networking. She also found joy in teaching yoga part-time at a high-end studio, where she found fulfillment in helping others achieve inner peace. However, as time passed, cracks began to show in their seemingly perfect life. Thaddius became increasingly absorbed in his career, working longer hours and pursuing bigger deals, rarely returning home before 9 p.m. Even when he was home, his attention was divided, constantly checking emails or market updates. Margot, now nearing her 40s, started to feel a sense of emptiness. The yoga classes and charity work that had once brought her joy began to feel unfulfilling, and she started questioning whether she had sacrificed her dreams for a life that felt like a golden cage. Adding to their struggles was their inability to conceive, despite years of trying, which placed further strain on their marriage. By the summer of 2019, their relationship had become a carefully maintained illusion. To the outside world, they still appeared to be the perfect couple, while Thaddius continued to succeed in his career, recently securing a deal that positioned him for a partnership. Margot's yoga classes had become more popular than ever, with students drawn to her warmth and the aura of peace she projected. However, behind the facade of serenity, her marriage was in turmoil. At home, she and Thaddius had become virtual strangers. Their conversations, when they did happen, were brief and focused only on schedules or social obligations. Physical intimacy had become rare, and when it occurred, it was weighed down by unspoken resentments and unmet expectations. Neither Thaddius nor Margot was willing to fully acknowledge how far they had drifted apart. It was easier to maintain the appearance of a happy marriage than to confront the emotional distance that had grown between them. Unbeknownst to them, this widening rift would soon become the spark for a tragedy that would not only devastate their lives, but also shake the entire Riverside community. The Coopers had moved into the house next door to the Hendersons in 2014, following the death of Elaine Cooper's husband, Dr. Reginald Cooper, a well-respected oncologist. Ironically, Reginald had died from the very cancer he had spent his career fighting. His death left Elaine to raise their son Liam on her own. Elaine, a quiet and reserved librarian, initially found it difficult to adjust to her new life in the affluent suburb. The move from their modest home in St. Paul had been necessary to escape the painful memories of her late husband, but the new neighborhood felt foreign and out of place. Elaine found comfort in her books and in tending to her garden, which quickly became the envy of the neighborhood. Her son Liam had been 14 years old when they relocated. An introverted, lanky teenager who felt more at ease with computers than with people. The transition to a new school had been tough for Liam. He often found himself the target of bullies, who mocked his second-hand clothes and quiet nature. During this challenging time, Thaddius Henderson stepped in, offering Liam a job mowing lawns and doing odd tasks around the neighborhood. Over the next 5 years, Liam flourished. The once awkward teen matured into a handsome young man, with his natural intelligence thriving in his computer science studies at the university. Despite his newfound confidence, Liam remained deeply devoted to his mother, Elaine. He was concerned about her loneliness and isolation and made it a priority to come home most weekends, even when his friends had other plans. It was during one of these weekend visits in early June that Liam first saw Margot Henderson in a different light. Elaine had always been grateful to the Hendersons, especially to Margot, for including her in neighborhood events. She often praised Margot's kindness, completely unaware of the complex emotions brewing inside her son. The affair between Margot Henderson and Liam Cooper sparked unexpectedly but intensely. It happened one warm evening in early June, during one of the Hendersons' famous summer barbecues. As usual, Thaddius was the center of attention by the grill, entertaining his colleagues with stories of his recent financial victories. Margot, feeling particularly isolated amid the crowd, had retreated to the pool house to refresh the ice bucket. Liam, who had been reluctantly dragged to the event by his mother, chose that moment to escape the noise and force small talk. What began as a chance encounter in the quiet of the pool house would soon ignite into something far more dangerous and destructive. Liam entered the pool house, unaware that anyone was inside, and found Margot struggling with a heavy bag of ice. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. He moved to help her, their hands brushing briefly. They stood there, frozen for a moment, the cold of the ice sharply contrasting with the heat that seemed to build between them. Margot broke the silence, her voice husky as she thanked him. Liam, usually composed and articulate, found himself stammering in response. That brief encounter marked the beginning of something neither of them had anticipated. Over the next few weeks, Margot and Liam began creating reasons to spend time together. It started innocently enough, Margot asking Liam for help with her laptop, or Liam offering to assist with her garden. But each interaction was charged with an unspoken tension, a mutual attraction they both tried and failed to ignore. Their first kiss happened nearly a month after the barbecue. Liam had been helping Margot set up for one of her yoga classes in the park. As they finished, a sudden summer storm rolled in, and they ran for cover under a gazebo, laughing and breathless as the rain poured down around them. Margot looked at Liam and felt a surge of desire she hadn't felt in years. Without thinking, she leaned in and kissed him. From that moment, their affair escalated quickly. They were reckless, driven by a mix of Liam's youthful passion and Margot's desperate need to feel alive again. They met in secret, sneaking around town, hiding in the back row of the local cinema, in secluded corners of the public library, and most dangerously, in the Henderson home while Thaddius was at work. Each encounter left them wanting more, the gap in their ages fading away in the heat of their stolen moments. Margot felt revitalized, rediscovering parts of herself she thought she had lost long ago. Liam was captivated by Margot's experience and the forbidden nature of their relationship. But as the summer progressed, the strain of keeping their secret began to show. Close calls became more frequent. A neighbor nearly caught them in an embrace, and Elaine started to give Liam suspicious looks when Margot's name came up too often in conversation. Guilt also began to weigh heavily on them both. Liam struggled with the fact that he was betraying Thaddius, a man who had been nothing but kind to him. Margot, on the other hand, found herself lying more and more to her husband, each lie another crack in the fragile foundation of their marriage. Despite the risks and mounting guilt, neither could bring themselves to end the affair. They were trapped in a whirlwind of passion and need, blind to the catastrophic consequences that loomed ahead. July 15, 2019 dawned hot and humid, with the heavy air hinting at an approaching storm. It was a typical Monday, as Riverside residents began their daily routines. For Thaddius Henderson, it was just another day. He woke early, donned one of his perfectly tailored suits, and left for the office before Margot had even woken up. Margot stirred later, her mind already buzzing with plans for the day. Thaddius had informed her the night before that he would be working late, attending an important client dinner that could seal his promotion to partner. For Margot, this meant an opportunity. She sent a text to Liam, her heart racing as she suggested he come over that afternoon. Liam, who had been grappling with guilt and contemplating the affair for days, saw the message as a chance to finally end things face to face. He replied with a simple okay, determined to break it off before the situation spiraled further out of control. The day dragged on slowly for both Margot and Liam. Margot went through the motions of her morning yoga class, but her usual calm was replaced by a nervous energy that her students couldn't help but notice. Liam, at his summer job, struggled to focus on the lines of code on his screen, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of Margot and the difficult conversation that awaited. At 2:30 p.m., Liam made his way next door, glancing around nervously to ensure no neighbors were watching. Margot quickly ushered him inside, her face flushed with a mix of excitement and anxiety. Liam broke the silence, attempting to start the conversation about ending the affair, but Margot, misreading his intent and driven by a desperate need to feel desired, silenced him with a passionate kiss. Despite his earlier resolve, Liam found himself responding, his will weakening under the force of Margot's intensity. What happened next was a blur. Clothes were hastily discarded, and they made their way to the master bedroom, all thoughts of ending the affair momentarily forgotten as they lost themselves in each other. Meanwhile, across town, Thaddius Henderson sat at his office desk, frowning at his computer screen. The numbers for the client presentation weren't adding up, and he realized he would need to redo a large portion of the work. Frustrated, he made a sudden decision. He would head home to regroup, then return to the office later to finish before the dinner. At 3:45 p.m., Thaddius pulled into the driveway. He noticed Liam Cooper's beat-up Honda parked a little way down the street but thought nothing of it, assuming Liam was helping his mother with something. As he unlocked the front door and entered the house, a strange feeling washed over him. The house was eerily quiet, but something felt off. A half-empty glass of wine sat on the coffee table, odd for Margot at this hour. Then he heard it, a muffled noise coming from upstairs. With a growing sense of dread, Thaddius climbed the stairs, the sound becoming clearer as he approached the master bedroom. What he saw when he opened the door would be a moment forever burned into his memory. Thaddius Henderson stood frozen, staring at the scene that would be forever seared into his memory. His wife, Margot, the woman he had loved for 15 years, was in their bed with Liam Cooper, the 19-year-old he had mentored and trusted. Overcome with a mix of rage and pain, Thaddius let out a roar and lunged forward. His hands, once used for crunching numbers and shaking hands in business deals, now clenched into fists as he grabbed Liam and yanked him off the bed. Margot screamed, scrambling to cover herself and separate the two men, but it was too late. Thaddius's first punch landed squarely on Liam's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Fueled by adrenaline and fear, Liam fought back. The two men grappled violently, crashing into the dresser and knocking over framed photos and trinkets. In the chaos, no one noticed the heavy crystal bookend that fell from the top of the dresser. No one saw it until Thaddius, blinded by rage, grabbed the bookend and brought it down on Liam's head with a sickening thud. The sound echoed in the sudden, deafening silence that followed. Liam crumpled to the floor, blood quickly pooling around his lifeless form. Margot's scream cut through the stillness as the horrifying reality sank in. Outside, storm clouds gathered, and the faint sound of sirens grew louder. In that moment, as sirens wailed in the distance, the lives of everyone in that room were irrevocably changed. The peaceful facade of Riverside was shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. Minutes later, the piercing wail of police sirens shattered the usual tranquility of the neighborhood. Curious and anxious neighbors peered out from behind their curtains as squad cars and an ambulance came to a screeching halt in front of the Henderson home. The first officers on the scene were met with a nightmarish tableau that would haunt them for years. Inside, they found a shell-shocked Thaddius Henderson, his hands covered in blood, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Margot, barely clothed and hysterical, was nearby. The room told the story of a violent struggle, overturned furniture, shattered glass, and blood smeared across the hardwood floor. The perfect life the Hendersons had once projected was gone, replaced by a tragedy that would ripple through the entire community. Detective Ava Rossi, a seasoned veteran of the homicide unit, arrived at the chaotic scene and immediately took control. Her first priority was ensuring that Liam Cooper received medical attention, as paramedics worked desperately to stabilize him. Meanwhile, Rossi began the difficult task of unraveling the events that led to the brutal attack. Thaddius Henderson, still in shock, was taken into custody without any resistance, while Margot was questioned separately. Both of their accounts, emotional and disjointed, painted a picture of a marriage filled with long-standing tension that had finally erupted in violence. As news spread through the quiet suburban neighborhood, a crowd gathered at the police cordon. Among them was Elaine Cooper, Liam's mother, who collapsed in grief when informed of her son's critical condition. She was immediately taken to the hospital, where Liam lay fighting for his life in the ICU. The investigation moved swiftly. Forensics teams scoured the Henderson home, collecting evidence and photographing the scene. The crystal bookend, now considered a potential murder weapon, was bagged and tagged as critical evidence. Neighbors were interviewed, adding more details to the complex relationships between the Hendersons and the Coopers. One neighbor mentioned hearing raised voices earlier that afternoon, but had dismissed it as a TV playing too loudly. Another remembered seeing Liam enter the Henderson home at around 2:30 p.m., noting it because Thaddius typically worked late. As the day turned to night, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. At 9:47 p.m., Liam Cooper was pronounced dead, never having regained consciousness. The charge against Thaddius Henderson was upgraded from assault to second-degree murder. In the days that followed, more details came to light. Consumed with guilt and facing immense public scrutiny, Margot admitted to the affair with Liam. Her tearful confession at the police station laid out the timeline of their relationship and the fateful events leading to the tragedy. Thaddius, advised by his lawyer, maintained his silence, though his colleagues at work described a man under tremendous pressure, working long hours to secure a partnership that had been just within reach. None of them had suspected the depth of his marital issues or the explosive violence that had been unleashed that day. Despite the mounting evidence against Thaddius, Detective Rossi knew that in the eyes of the public, this story held no clear villains or heroes. Instead, it was a tragedy of secrets and lies that had finally come to light, destroying lives in the process. But what no one anticipated was the shocking twist that was yet to come. A twist that would leave everyone, including the Hendersons, reeling. The Henderson trial began on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the tragic events that had shaken Riverside to its core. The county courthouse, a stately building of red brick and white columns, was surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the tension was palpable as the judge called the court to order. Prosecuting attorney Veronica Talbot, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, laid out the state's case in her opening statement. She painted a vivid picture of Thaddius Henderson as a man consumed by rage and jealousy, who had brutally murdered a young man in the prime of his life. Talbot's words were measured yet impactful, her gaze sweeping across the jury as she promised to prove Henderson's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. In contrast, defense attorney Sterling presented a narrative of his own. He portrayed Thaddius as a devoted husband and pillar of the community, pushed to the brink by a betrayal of the deepest kind. He suggested that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts testified about blood spatter patterns and the force required to inflict Liam's fatal injury. Neighbors recounted the events of that day, while character witnesses spoke to the personalities and reputations of both Thaddius and Liam. However, it was Margot Henderson's testimony that truly captivated the courtroom. Over 2 grueling days on the stand, she laid bare the disintegration of her marriage and the evolution of her relationship with Liam. Her voice trembled as she described the moment Thaddius walked in on them, and the horror of watching the confrontation unfold. Under cross-examination, Sterling tried to paint her as an unfaithful wife whose actions had driven her husband to temporary insanity. Despite his attempts to discredit her, Margot held firm, accepting her part in the tragedy while insisting that nothing could justify Liam's death. Elaine Cooper's testimony was brief but powerful. Still grief-stricken, she spoke of her son's kindness, intelligence, and dreams for the future, all tragically cut short by an act of violence. The courtroom fell silent as she recounted the profound loss she had endured, her words resonating with the jurors and those gathered in the courtroom. As the trial continued, it became evident that the consequences of that fateful day would ripple through the lives of all involved for years to come. The jury faced the difficult task of determining the truth in a case marked by betrayal, loss, and an all-consuming passion that led to tragedy. Her quiet dignity in the face of unimaginable loss moved many in the courtroom to tears. As the trial neared its end, all eyes turned to Thaddius Henderson. Against his lawyer's advice, he chose to take the stand, and his testimony was a study in contrasts. Moments of apparent remorse were interspersed with flashes of the anger that had led to Liam's death. Thaddius spoke of the pressure he had been under at work, the growing distance in his marriage, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity. When describing the fight with Liam, he claimed he had never intended to cause serious harm, that he had simply lost control. As the trial progressed, expert witnesses from the field of psychology were called to provide insight into the minds involved in the tragic events. Dr. Cho, a psychologist, explained that Thaddius's actions could be understood through the lens of what psychologists call intermittent explosive disorder, characterized by episodes of violent and aggressive behavior disproportionate to the situation. She pointed to Thaddius's high-stress job, his unexpressed marital dissatisfaction, and the shock of discovering his wife's infidelity as contributing factors to his violent outburst. However, under cross-examination, Dr. Cho conceded that while these factors could explain Thaddius's behavior, they did not excuse it. She emphasized that many individuals face similar stressors without resorting to violence. The defense called a specialist in marriage and family therapy to testify about the psychological impact of infidelity. Fredman described the profound sense of betrayal and loss of identity that a person may experience upon discovering a spouse's affair, likening it to a form of psychological trauma capable of triggering extreme emotional responses. The psychological analyses presented during the trial offered a complex picture of human behavior and motivation, highlighting how a combination of personal history, societal expectations, and immediate circumstances can collide to create a perfect storm of tragedy. After 7 grueling weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the fate of Thaddius Henderson rested in the hands of the jury. As Judge Blackwell sent the 12 men and women to deliberate, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. After a short recess to consider all factors, Judge Blackwell returned to deliver her sentence. Citing the violent nature of the crime balanced against Thaddius's lack of prior criminal history and the unique circumstances of the case, she sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. As Thaddius was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of the tragedy seemed to descend upon the courtroom. There were no victors here, only lives irrevocably altered by a moment of passion and a split second of violence. Outside, as news of the verdict spread, the crowd's reactions were mixed. Some felt justice had been served, while others argued the sentence was either too harsh or too lenient. But all agreed on one thing. The events that had unfolded in Riverside would leave an indelible mark on the community for years to come.